Hello everyone, welcome back to part 2 of my Gospel 101 series where we are examining what the gospel is and why some people don't understand or believe it to be true. So we will go ahead and jump right in with part 2 of this series as we dive in. So we've been discussing what the gospel is specifically, and so this is much more a technical definitional question, and we've been defining it with different ideas of philosophy, and my main focus has been kind of pushing us towards a definition of the gospel that's slightly different than most people, because it helps us to understand what obstacles keep other people from understanding and believing it. And that specific definition is that the gospel is the lens that Christians view the entire world, informed by the entire Bible. So this includes a lot of the philosophical and psychological and theological ideas that are present in the Bible and that Christians accept when they decide to believe in the gospel. So a lot of this stuff is actually presupposed before even discussing the matter of the specific message of the gospel itself. And so it's important for us to understand what that is and how that plays out. And so the way that I've kind of illustrated this is using this pyramid of paradigms. And so essentially what this is this is a stack of different ideas ranging from objective reality all the way up to the Bible being true, and where different people will fall on different steps. This is kind of where people will fall short from believing or accepting that the Bible is true for different reasons and that the gospel is true for reasons. And so we're going to kind of take it some time today to do a few case studies, essentially, of applying this model and figuring out where people are on these steps and how we would approach them. So let's go ahead and jump into a few examples. So let's say, suppose you meet somebody who says that, hey, God just doesn't care about us. God is just one of many spiritual beings, and that God's existence really makes no difference whether he exists or not. And so the question that we want to ask is, are any of these people true Christians? Can any of these people be true Christians while believing these things? And so we're going to analyze each case in turn here. So the first claim is that God doesn't care about us. This is the fundamental claim of the ideal of deism, that the idea that God exists but is disinterested and unengaged with the workings of the world. And so what keeps people from being Christian as a deist is usually the fact that they fall on the step of maybe God's existence and sometimes God's authority, but their denial of the Bible and the claims that it makes about God being interested and invested in humanity and the moral workings and lives of humanity is where they kind of fall short of being deemed Christian. Most deists seem to believe that God could have authority, but is usually too disinterested to exercise it in any real way. And so there's a good example of how there's different types of deists in many cases, where some people would say he has authority, he doesn't exercise it. Some people say he exists, but other than that, he just kind of lets the universe run, and after his initial investment of creation itself, he has no authority over the way that I choose to live within that creation. And so people can fall on different steps while still being part of the deist camp. I threw them on the God exists step because most of them typically believe that God's authority ends before their lives start. And so the accepting of God's authority is usually an issue for most deists. The second claim, that God is just one of many spiritual beings, would categorize somebody as being a polytheist. And so oftentimes, what a polytheist is that there's an idea that they are many spiritual beings or deities, and that none are supreme or inherently greater than the other. And so they do not view them as having any one being as having a unique or transcendent authority by virtue of none of them being ultimately greater than any other. So really what this means is that they view the world as a combination of many spirits and deities and influences, and that through this weird influence, that is kind of the definition of right and wrong, is primarily subjective, whether that is from a human perspective or from the perspective of one of the many deities that they can align themselves with. Something that might be right or good to one deity might not necessarily be right or good to another one. And so this can place them on a number of steps, really. And whether there's denying that there's an objective morality, since it just depends on which deity you're serving, or by not believing in any universal deity, monotheistic God, which is kind of a hidden step between God exists and God has authority that isn't really in this model. But there's different places that a polytheist could land on that, and different views of morality that they may carry as a consequence of believing in a polytheistic spiritual world or nature of the universe. And so it's important to talk to people and actually gauge, hey, where are you? What do you believe about morality when you're discussing things with a polytheist? The next claim is that God's existence or not makes no difference to me, or that we can't really know if God exists or not, and it's not going to make a difference in my life either way. Then this is kind of the idea of agnosticism. And so the agnostics acknowledge and express a fundamental uncertainty regarding God's existence and nature. And they have kind of one foot on the God exists step and one foot off of God existing. And they certainly don't fully believe that God has authority, though some would try to adhere to some form of morality to kind of hedge their bets and hope for the best. And so usually agnosticism, I've found, comes as an outgrowth of a distrust or a distaste for some particular teaching of a religious faith, while also acknowledging the value of other parts of it. And so they're certainly not willing to accept God's universal authority or believing that the Bible is true, and they usually use their ignorance as an excuse for an apathy towards the claims of Christianity or of any religion. You can find agnostics that come from all sorts of different backgrounds, and usually their claim is that I don't understand it, or it's difficult to understand or to guess what the doctrines are claiming, and so I'm just going to stay out of it. And so the reality is that none of these people can really claim to be a Christian. You can come from a Christian background and then believe these things, but these ideas, these philosophies, they are disagreeing with the fundamental doctrines of Christianity. And so when talking with these people, it's mostly a matter of discussing the specific points. It's rather not a matter of discussing specific points about the gospel message, but more about the philosophical, the theological discussions about the nature of reality, morality, and theology. And so being a Christian is really defined as a belief in a common core set of beliefs and doctrines. And then we examine the pyramid over here, that 3 out of 5 of these major steps are directly related to defining God. And so we will spend some time defining God and who He is according to the Christian doctrines here in just a second. And so there is important for us to kind of understand that, hey, this is important to understand that, hey, we make claims about God, about His existence, about His nature as a monotheistic God, as His universal authority, and about His word in the Bible. And so it's important for us to really be clear and understand, what do Christians believe about God? And essentially that Christians believe that God is eternal and uncreated. That means He is not a created being in any capacity, so claims of, oh, He is one of many that was created in a different, like, higher level universe and then distinguished themselves and deserved or reached enlightenment and somehow created His own universe. That's not a Christian belief. Unique and transcendent. There is none like God. God is the only God and the only one with the power to create a universe and to have all of the authority and status that comes with that. And that's the next point as well, that God is the creator and therefore the authority of all, both all physical nature, all psychological nature, and all moral nature. God is the ultimate authority. God is also a rational God. He is knowable. He is a God of truth. And so we can actually have a rational mind and seek these truths of God and come to know Him through these rationalizations, through logic and reasoning. And God does actually seek to be known through specific revelation. He wants us to know about Him through His Word. And so the Bible reveals to us specific truths about who God is and what He wants for us. And some of that specific revelation, and even some general revelation of just examining ourselves, can tell us that God loves us and wants what's best for us. He's not disinterested. He is interested, and He actually does have a stake in our lives and wants our lives to go well. And that also God is just, and He cannot let evil go unpunished. And so these are all important teachings, and they hit on all sorts of different levels of that pyramid. The idea that the universe was created intentionally, the fact that intelligent design is the way that a Christian ought to view the world, the authority of a creator over its creation is this implied authority that is carried through to morality as well as to physical reality. And the Bible as an intentionally crafted message. Christians believe that the Bible is important and a direct message from God that is supposed to illuminate how we should act and live. And so all of these are really important presuppositions to understanding the gospel that deal directly with God and his nature. But honestly, for most people, the biggest hurdle doesn't necessarily come with this theological definition of God. It usually comes in the form of God being the moral authority. And so the hardest point for most people to believe is that God is the ultimate moral authority. And humility to acknowledge our own sin, especially within our own lives, is usually the hardest step for us to overcome. That fundamental pride of having the humility that's required to set aside your pride to say, God, I am broken, I have failed, I am insufficient on my own, and that I need you. That is the humility that is fundamental to Christianity, and that is usually the biggest sticking point for most people. They want to say, well, my sin isn't wrong, or that my sins are covered by my good deeds. I'm good enough that my sins aren't a problem for me. And so that is one of the biggest fundamental kind of emotional responses, and usually it's rooted in an emotion of trying to feel good enough or to feel like you have esteem. And so it's important for us to kind of understand that as we go into these conversations, that usually this is the biggest issue that almost everybody runs into, is that God has the right to define what is right and what is wrong, and whether that is embodied, that comes out in lots of different ways, whether it's the problem of suffering, saying that because the world is broken, God is evil, and therefore I cannot trust that he is good, or that he has a good plan for the world existing the way it is, and other manifestations of that. And we can do a separate video that really digs into all of those little questions that are really important and very fascinating to discuss. But it's important for us to understand that, hey, this sin in our lives, the sin in our world, is something that God can't tolerate, and that he cannot allow sin and him to coexist eternally. They just don't mix. And so the Christian doctrines over sin are so important, and that's why I want to take a moment to say that, hey, this is what Christians believe about sin. That we believe that the world is broken, and it's not just a human issue, it's an entire universe issue. That sin is objectively wrong as defined by God, the creator and authority of morality. It is objectively and always wrong, and that each person is sinful inherently. We are automatically drawn to sin, and we cannot be perfect enough to redeem ourselves. It's not by our works or our efforts that we are able to find salvation. And so this is one of the biggest ways that pride can hinder somebody from seeking God. Our modern culture is one that is rooted in radical acceptance. And Christians know that we will always seek to justify sin. And so what a lot of times people will say, oh, we should be tolerant, we should be accepting of people that are different from you. There is a tolerance and acceptance to a degree, but that is often extended out to things that are wrong, and saying, oh, you must accept something that's wrong because otherwise you are bigoted, otherwise you are being very restrictive and authoritarian to other people. And so it is painted in a positive light, but it's important to remember that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And what may start off as something that comes from a good place in your heart might not actually have a good outcome. And many modern people are very hesitant to even accept now that there is such a thing as objective morality. And we have become so accepting that we are often afraid to define something as right or wrong, or define what right and wrong even means. Or even if we acknowledge that there are some things that are right and some things that are wrong, we're always seeking to justify or downplay wickedness. I've heard many non-Christians say that, surely sin can't be that big of a deal. Like, everybody does it, and some people do it a lot. Most people don't do it all that much. They don't think they're doing the wrong thing, but surely it's not a big deal. Everybody does it a little bit, so we're all kind of in the same boat. But the picture that the Bible consistently paints is that sin is incredibly serious, and it's damaging, and it spreads like wildfire. And this is a super important thing to understand, that sin is not acceptable, and any amount of sin is ruinous and can cause incredible amounts of pain, suffering, and evil to proliferate. And so this is an important topic that's really worth a more in-depth discussion later on as well, because this is very extensive and very important. But the bottom line is that proper understanding of sin and its relationship to both God and humanity is an important foundational understanding for someone to receive the gospel. And then it's kind of seen in multiple steps on the pyramid, and each step is essential. So believing that objective morality exists and that God has the authority to define sin, and that the Bible about the sinful nature of humanity and how we are drawn to it, all of these things are things that you kind of must accept and understand before you can truly understand the gospel. And so each step of this is essential for us to kind of establish before somebody's even ready to receive the gospel. And so the reason that the gospel is relevant at all is because sin is a serious and major problem. It's the problem that we all need a solution to, and that solution is found in the last major element of the gospel, namely Jesus Christ. And so Jesus is the center of the gospel, and it's important for us Christians to know what we believe about Jesus as well. And so we want to look and see, defining that specifically Jesus is the fullness of God. So everything that we said about God applies to Jesus as well. So that he is also the creator of the world. And Jesus also, because he is the creator, has the authority of the creator. So when Jesus speaks and when Jesus defines things, we can trust that those are true. That Jesus was fully man, and therefore he is qualified to act as a representative on humanity's behalf. And he has the same attributes as the Father, the same in nature. And that means he's loving, he's just, he provides, he cares about us individually. And so all of these are really important points. The identity of Jesus is a super important point, and that's illustrated in Matthew chapter 16, verse 15. And Jesus asks his disciples, hey, what are people saying about me? And they provide all sorts of definitions, all sorts of sayings and ideas that people are coming up with. But he turns to them and he says, who do you say that I am? And this is a really, really important point. Who do you say that I am? It doesn't matter what other people say or how they might define Jesus, but what Jesus cares about is, who do you say that I am? Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and other Christian cults are very keen to alter this key detail. And so only true Christians see Jesus as who he truly claimed to be. And it's a matter of knowledge and of belief in the claims and work of Jesus as God with us, intervening on our behalf to save us from the impending consequences of sin. So we must exactly know who Jesus is. It's the most attacked element of the gospel throughout all of history. And it's important for us to remember that, hey, to know Jesus is to know God. And that is the whole point of what we do. We want to have a relationship with God. We want to know who he is. We want to know what he cares about. We want to know how he thinks we ought to live our lives. And so I want to leave you off with this video with a reflection, really asking, how well do you know Jesus? Do you understand who Jesus is, and can you prove that with the Bible? Can you open up to stories, to verses, to passages that show, hey, this is who Jesus is and how I can know that? And are you confident in explaining why Jesus is significant? How are his actions important and impact us today? And the reality is that many Christians are not really fully equipped and often avoid really digging into and pondering these questions because they kind of just take it for granted. They just presuppose, oh yeah, I believe in Jesus. But it's really incredibly important to make sure that you understand this. It's foundational. This is the bedrock of our faith. It's Jesus and who he is. And so nothing else about Christianity really means anything without a firm grasp of the gospel. And at the core of the gospel is Jesus, and at the core of Jesus is what we seek to be. And so I want us to encourage all believers to spend more time getting to know their Savior, both intellectually and relationally. Take the time to come closer to Jesus, to answer the question, honestly, who do you say that I am? Who is Jesus to you? And so I want us to discuss this more in the next video as well. And we're going to continue this series for 2 more parts as we kind of examine and dig deeper into some of these questions. So please reach out if you have any questions or comments. I hope that this video was edifying and useful for you. Thank you for your time in watching it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.